I am Morgan Fellers, 29 years old women. I'm a residential architect in Asheville, North Carolina, and my mother passed away last spring after a long battle with cancer. What happened with my sister after the estate settled nearly broke me, but what I did next, it rewrote our entire childhood. The last time I stood in my mother's bedroom, she was asleep, her breath shallow, her fingers curled loosely around the edges of her blanket. The room was silent except for the faint wheeze of the oxygen tank beside her bed and the soft wind rustling through the cracked window. It smelled like lavender lotion, hospital wipes, and the dried roses I'd kept in a vase by her nightstand. She never woke up. I sat there for hours after the nurse confirmed she was gone. I didn't call Harper right away, not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I couldn't bear the thought of her coming in like a whirlwind, crying louder than anyone, making it all about her again. That was Harper's specialty. She turned grief into theater. She'd always had a knack for knowing just when to show up and just when to disappear. We were never close, not as kids, not as adults, but that didn't stop our mother from believing somehow, impossibly, that we'd find our way back to each other when she was gone. The funeral came and went in a blur of tight hugs, dry cookies, and pastel blouses that smelled like sadness. I gave the eulogy. Harper sobbed in the second row, holding a tissue like it was a script. Afterward, she told me I was brave. I just nodded because I didn't know what else to say to a sister who had barely visited Mom more than twice in the last year. But the silence that followed was louder than any of it. 2 weeks later, I was in my apartment, eating leftover Thai food straight from the carton when I got the email from the estate lawyer. The subject line was blunt: inheritance disbursement complete. The number sat there like a glitch in the matrix. $620,000. Evenly split. $310,000 each. I stared at it. The weight of that money didn't feel like a blessing. It felt like cement, heavy, irreversible, final. Not because of what it could buy, but because it was the last thing Mom left behind. Her life distilled into a spreadsheet. I sat there in the glow of my laptop screen, heart thudding in my chest, feeling sick. I didn't want the money, but I also didn't want Harper to have it. It was petty, maybe, but I couldn't shake the image of her last visit, her dramatic size, her flitting attention span, the way she took selfies in the driveway the day after Mom's chemo appointment like she was checking into a spa. Still, Mom had insisted. Equal, she'd said in her will, even after I'd begged her, pleaded, really, to reconsider. I told her Harper would squander it, that she'd disappear again and only show up when it was convenient. She's your sister, Mom had said softly, her voice dry from meds. She's more than the worst thing she's ever done. But that was easy to say when she wouldn't be around to see the fallout. 2 days after the funds cleared, I saw the Zillow listing for our childhood home change. It had been on the market for a while, ever since Mom got sick and couldn't keep up with the property taxes. She wanted to sell it to give us something. It wasn't in great shape, but it had a good foundation, old bones. The kind of house that needed love, not demolition. Now it was listed as pending. I froze. The house had never sold, not while Mom was alive, and definitely not right after the funeral. The odds of a buyer swooping in that fast with cash in this market. Slim. I clicked on the agent's profile and called the number listed. She answered on the third ring, Cheryl Williamson. Hi, I said, trying to keep my voice even. I'm Morgan Fellers. I believe you were the listing agent for 128 Riverwood Lane. Ah, yes, just went under contract. Do you happen to know who the buyer is? A pause. Normally I can't disclose that, but are you family? My mom was the previous owner. Another pause, then warmly, oh, you're Harper's sister. I closed my eyes. Yeah, she said cheerfully. Your sister made an all-cash offer 2 days ago, wanted to close fast, said it meant a lot to her. I didn't remember the rest of the call. Just a buzzing in my ears, my fingers going numb around the phone, and the sour taste of betrayal rising in my throat. I texted Harper immediately. You bought the house. Why didn't you say anything? No response. I checked my bank account, more out of instinct than suspicion, and that's when I saw it. Gone. $310,000. Every cent. Vanished through 3 transfers I didn't authorize, all within 24 hours of each other, all routed through accounts I hadn't touched in weeks. My password had been changed. and the last known login IP. My mother's old iMac, which was still in her bedroom, still plugged in, still auto-logged into all my profiles because I'd used it to submit medical paperwork on her behalf. Harper had stayed overnight once after the funeral. Just once. She offered to help sort through Mom's keepsakes. I'd been too exhausted to argue. I felt a scream crawl up my throat. I called the bank, filed a fraud claim, froze my accounts. But they warned me, unless you can prove it wasn't you, these things can be hard to prosecute, especially if the access came from your own devices. Especially if it's family. Especially if it's your sister. I stared at the ceiling that night, curled in bed, my laptop glowing with open tabs, property law, inheritance theft, civil lawsuits, identity fraud. None of it made me feel better. None of it made me feel like I'd won anything. Harper hadn't just taken the money. She'd taken the house. My mother's house, my house. The house with the crack in the front step where I'd tripped and split my knee open in 3rd grade. The house with the scratched doorframe that still had our height markings penciled in. She took it and she didn't even bother to ask. I drove by the next morning. The FOR sale sign was gone. A moving truck was in the driveway. Harper stood on the porch holding a paint roller, talking to a man in a Home Depot shirt. Like she lived there. Like she belonged. I didn't get out of the car. I just sat there and watched until my stomach churned and I had to drive away. But that night, after hours of packing, crying, and screaming into my pillow, I stopped. And I saw it. I saw the blueprint of a different kind of revenge. Not loud. Not fast. Not fueled by rage. Strategic. Slow. Permanent. She used my money to take what she thought she could keep. But I was going to take it back brick by brick, contract by contract, with my own name carved into the deed. And this time, she wouldn't see it coming. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my back staring at the ceiling fan spinning like a slow metronome, its quiet tick-tick-tick counting down the seconds since everything I'd known had been turned upside down. Anger rolled under my skin like static. It wasn't just that she'd stolen the money. It was that she knew what that house meant to me, to both of us, really, and she'd weaponized it. She didn't even want it when Mom was alive. I remembered her once calling it outdated and depressing. But the moment it became leverage, suddenly she was sentimental. That was the moment I stopped being sad and started making a plan. By 8 a.m., I was outside a small brick building downtown with gold lettering on the window. Todd Meeker, attorney at law, family estate and civil claims. Todd and I went to high school together. He had a reputation for being steady, patient, and relentless in court, exactly the kind of person I needed. I texted him the night before. The moment he opened the door and saw my face, he didn't say a word, just led me to a chair and poured a coffee from the carafe on his desk. "I'm guessing this isn't a social call," he said, his voice soft but firm. I handed him the bank printout and watched his eyes scan the numbers. 3 unauthorized transfers, same IP, from your mother's old iMac. Yes. He sat back in Harper had access. She was the only one there. She stayed the night to help. The password was saved. She knew how much Mom left us. She knew when it would clear. He nodded slowly. You realize this is a felony, right? Theft over $100,000, that's serious time. I don't want jail time, I said quickly. I want my house. Todd raised a brow. You want the house back? No, I leaned in, my voice cold. I want it in my name. I want her out, and I want it done legally, no mess, no drama, just permanent. He didn't hesitate. Then we go 2 routes. 1, we file a civil suit for inheritance theft and breach of fiduciary relationship. 2, we start digging, credit, renovations, liens, anything she touched during or after purchase. If she bought the house with stolen funds, the title can be challenged. If she didn't follow permitting laws or defaults on anything, we squeeze her out financially. It sounded ruthless. It also sounded perfect. By the time I left his office, my plan was no longer just a spiral in my head. It was real, a document, a process. I went home and opened a new folder on my desktop, Reclamation. Inside it, I created subfolders. Bank statements. IP metadata. Real estate permits. Harper's contractor contacts. I was going to document everything. Every receipt, every transfer, every misstep she made while pretending she had earned what she stole. That night, I reached out to an old contact, Danny, who worked for a boutique architecture firm and had access to property records and contractor logs. We interned together once in Atlanta, and though we hadn't talked in a while, she picked up on the first ring. "I need intel," I said, quietly. Danny was silent for a beat. "Morgan, is this about your mom's house? She bought it using my inheritance." Another pause. "Jesus, that's low. I want to know if she filed for any permits, renovations, demo orders, anything that might flag her." "I'm on it," she said. "Text me the address." Within 24 hours, I had my first piece of leverage. Harper had submitted an application for a partial roof replacement, but the permit hadn't been approved yet. According to city records, she'd already begun tearing it out. That alone was enough for a complaint. Strike one. I took a drive that weekend to see the house again, not to confront her, just to look. The moving truck was gone now. A black Lexus sat in the driveway, her vanity plate HRPRXO catching the sunlight. The porch was half painted. The front yard had weeds pushing through cracks in the concrete. It already looked neglected. Then I saw the construction sign, Barker Roofing Co., permit pending. I pulled out my phone and called the number listed. A man named Lance answered. "This is Morgan Fellers," I said. "I'm looking at one of your job sites, Riverwood Lane. Wanted to ask about your experience with that homeowner." He chuckled, low and tired. "Let's just say I'm still waiting on a deposit. She promised a down payment by Friday, then pushed it. Said she had a financial hiccup." I kept my voice calm. "If she defaults, do you plan to file a mechanics lien?" "Already started the paperwork." I thanked him and hung up. Strike two. Now I knew Harper had no idea what she'd gotten herself into. The house wasn't just a trophy, it was a money pit. Between permits, materials, and unpaid labor, it would eat her alive. All I had to do was wait. But I didn't wait passively. Todd filed the fraud complaint that week and sent a certified letter to Harper's new address, the one she'd stolen. She didn't respond. Instead, she called me 2 days later. I stared at her name on my phone, thumb hovering over the screen, heart pounding. When I picked up, I didn't say anything. "Morgan," she said quietly. Still, I said nothing. She sighed. "I know you're angry." "Try betrayed," I replied. "Try robbed. I didn't think you'd notice right away." There it was, the arrogance, the calculation. "I noticed," I said, "and now so has the court." She went quiet. Then, "The house is falling apart. Contractors are backing out. The roof is leaking. I thought I could handle it, but—" "You stole from me," I snapped. "You used our mother's death as an opportunity, and you thought I'd just lie down and let it happen." "I didn't know what else to do," she shouted suddenly, her voice cracking. "You always had everything under control. I needed to feel like I had something too." I let her words hang for a moment. "Then you took the only place I ever felt safe." Silence. And then she asked the question I had been waiting for. "Would you buy it from me?" I closed my eyes. "No," I said, "but I'll own it again. You just won't see how or when." Then I hung up. I sat in the quiet for a long time after that, staring at the ceiling fan again. And I made myself a promise. The next time I walked into that house, it wouldn't be as a daughter or a victim. It would be as the owner. The next morning, I drove to the house again, not to knock, not to confront, but to observe. It was early, the sky still rubbed with that soft peach hue of morning. I parked a block away and walked, hood up, hands buried in my coat pockets. I stopped just before the property line and took it in. The shutters were still half hanging from the windows. The porch paint job had stalled out, one column still halfway coated in a patchy gray that didn't match the trim. A pile of old roofing shingles sat in a heap next to the recycling bins, warping in the weather. No sign of work crews, no hammering, no progress. And then, as I rounded the side of the house, I noticed something new, a posted notice from the city tacked to the front door. I moved closer, pretending to tie my shoe. My heart jumped. Stop work order. The permit for the roof hadn't just been delayed, it had been revoked. Probably after the roofer filed a formal complaint. The city had found unlicensed demo and unauthorized changes to the support beam structure. Construction was officially frozen. I stepped back, heart pounding. Strike three. Harper was unraveling. I returned to my apartment and updated the folder on my desktop. I added a scan of the stop work order plus a new subfolder, code violations. I included screenshots, complaint submission forms, and notes on the new fines Harper would now owe, with interest. Then I emailed Todd. He called me 15 minutes later. Harper's not going to be able to hold the house, he said. Once the lien from the roofing company hits, and with the city fees piling up, she'll either have to refinance or sell. She can't refinance with the lawsuit active, right? Correct, especially not with your fraud complaint in place. She's legally stuck. And if she tries to sell, she'll have to disclose the liens, which will tank the offer. I let the silence fill with satisfaction. So what now? I asked. We keep pressure on. If you want to reclaim the property outright, we file for a preliminary injunction. That allows us to freeze her ability to sell or borrow against it while the case is pending. Do it. I hung up and stared at the house on my desktop wallpaper, a photo from 5 years ago when the siding was still intact, the roses blooming beneath the kitchen window. I remembered standing on that porch in my bare feet, drinking orange juice and sketching plans for the little sunroom I wanted to add someday. Mom had laughed at me. "You never stop designing even when you're resting," she'd said. I missed her so much in that moment I had to put my head in my hands. But this wasn't just about grief anymore. It was about justice. About memory. About home. A week passed, then another. Each day I gathered more evidence. Receipts, bank screenshots, text threads. Danny sent me a file dump from the contractor network. Word had spread that Harper was a payment risk. She was blacklisted from 3 supply chains already. I went to the property records office and checked the title. It was still clean for now, but Todd had submitted the injunction, and once it was processed, any attempt to refinance would trigger a legal notice directly to me. It was only a matter of time. And then Harper called again. I answered on the second ring. "I got the papers," she said flatly. "Which ones?" "You know which ones." "Good." "I can't breathe," she said suddenly, her voice cracked. "Everything's falling apart. I thought I could fix it. I thought if I made the house beautiful again, maybe I could finally feel like I belonged somewhere." I didn't say anything. She took a breath. I was wrong. Still, I waited. Then she said the one sentence I never expected. "You win, Morgan, I'll sell." It hit me hard, not in triumph, but in disbelief. "Through an agent?" I asked. "No, to you." I hesitated. "I can't afford to fix it. I don't want to keep pretending I can. If you want it, it's yours." I took a breath, fingers tightening around the phone. "I'll buy it for $150,000, I said evenly. "What, that's?" "You bought it with my money. The court will see that. You have zero negotiating room." A long pause. I could hear her heartbeat in the silence. "Okay," she whispered, "okay." I hung up and called Todd. By the end of the day, we had a purchase agreement in draft. The transfer would be quiet, clean. The funds would come from a combination of my personal savings, a short-term line of credit, and a bridge loan secured by my condo. But I didn't care. I was getting the house back. By week's end, the contract was signed. The title transferred. The deed updated. My name was etched onto the records. Morgan Feller's owner. I drove out there alone the night after the deal closed. It was dark by the time I arrived. The porch light flickered faintly. The yard smelled like wet earth and old pine. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. It was quiet, hollow, like it had been waiting to exhale. The walls were bare, the renovation half finished. The kitchen floor was stripped to subflooring. The bathroom sink sat uninstalled in the hallway, dusty and cracked. Every room was a reminder of how she tried to rebuild something she didn't understand. But it didn't scare me. I'd rebuilt before. And this time I'd do it on my terms. With intention. With memory. I walked into Mom's room last. The curtains were gone, the closet empty. I sat on the edge of her old bed frame, the one Harper had moved but never replaced. And I whispered out loud like a prayer. "I brought it home, Mom." There was no reply, no sign, no flicker of spirit. Just the hum of a house finally settling into the hands that knew how to love it. The next morning, I woke up on the hardwood floor of my mother's bedroom with a crick in my neck and the kind of peace that doesn't feel exciting, just earned. I hadn't planned to stay the night. I didn't bring a change of clothes or even a pillow. But once I'd sat in the silence long enough, I realized I didn't want to leave. I didn't need the furniture to feel rooted here. I was the furniture. The house was mine again, legally and spiritually, and despite the peeled paint and exposed wiring, I'd never felt more at home in my own skin. I took the day off work, stopped at a diner for black coffee and a croissant, then headed to the hardware store where I walked the aisles like they were a candy shop. I'd repaint them a sage green maybe and swap the hardware for matte black. The floors would need sanding. The walls, smoothing, the bathroom, a full gut job. Harper had started it and left it mid-chaos, tiles missing, pipes capped but not sealed. I made a list. That night, I unrolled a sleeping bag in the living room, lit a candle on the windowsill, and cracked open my mother's old journal. It was filled with grocery lists and reminders and notes about our dental appointments. But halfway through, there was a page that stopped me cold. If they ever come back to this house, I hope it holds them gently. I hope they fight less and remember more. I closed the journal and pressed it to my chest. She had known. She'd always known. I spent the next 2 weeks sanding walls, patching holes, and stripping the rotted trim around the windows. It was hard work, my hands blistered, my back ached, and I smelled like sawdust and acetone half the time. But every night I collapsed onto the sleeping bag with muscles sore and spirit light. I wasn't just fixing a house. I was healing one. One morning, a knock came at the door. I opened it to find Danny holding a box of donuts and a thermos of hot coffee. "Figured you could use a break," she said. I laughed. "You read my mind." She stepped inside, blinking at the gutted walls and exposed subfloor. "Damn, this place looks like someone shook it and forgot to stop." "Accurate," I said, "but I've got a plan." We sat on the floor with our backs against the wall, eating donuts and sipping coffee like teenagers. She looked at me. "You've changed." "In a good way. In a grounded way. You don't look like someone trying to prove anything anymore." That landed deep. I had spent years trying to prove myself to Mom, to Harper, to the world, proving I could be the one who stayed, the one who handled things, the one who never let her grief make a mess. But now, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. I was doing this for me. Later that week, I found something unexpected. While pulling up the carpet in Harper's old attic room, a small envelope slipped out from beneath the edge of the floorboards. It had my name on it, in Harper's handwriting. I stared at it for a long time before I opened it. Inside was a single piece of lined paper. "Morgan, you were always the one who made this place feel like a home." I didn't know how to honor that, so I tried to take it. "I'm sorry. If you ever want to share this space again, I'll come when you ask, not before." Age. I folded the letter and placed it in the pocket of my flannel. I didn't know what to do with it yet. That night, I finished painting the hallway in silence. It was the same space we used to race through as kids, sliding in socks across the hardwood, laughing until Mom yelled to slow down. I painted slowly, deliberately. Each stroke was an apology, a memory, a reclaiming. The next day, I began working on the garden. It was overgrown, weeds choking the flower beds, the old trellis collapsed under the weight of dead vines. I cleared it inch by inch, sweating under the spring sun until I uncovered the faint outline of Mom's old herb patch. I replanted lavender, rosemary, and mint. I installed a small bird bath near the back fence. I placed a bench beneath the birch tree, or what was left of it, and ran my fingers over the bark. The air smelled like earth and hope. That weekend, I hosted my first quiet evening there. Just me, Danny, and two close friends from work. We brought wine, sat on the porch, and watched the sun sink behind the trees. Music played low from my phone. We didn't talk about the lawsuit, or Harper, or the money. We just sat in the hum of a house that had once been broken and was now healing. I went to bed that night in the attic, Harper's old room, with the letter still folded on the nightstand. I didn't open it again. I didn't need to. It wasn't about forgiveness yet. It was about permission. Permission to reclaim, to rebuild, to breathe. And somewhere in the silence, I felt my mother again. Not watching, not judging, just smiling. The attic became my sanctuary. It was ironic, really. It had once been Harper's space. Off limits. Her teenage refuge where she blasted CDs and wrote angry poetry in spiral notebooks she hid under her mattress. I used to sit on the stairs and press my ear to the door, hoping to be let in. Now it was empty. Sunlight poured through the cracked skylight, scattering dust like stars. I stripped the room down to its beams, repaired the ceiling leak, sanded the floor smooth until the wood looked like warm honey. Then I painted it soft white. Simple, clean. I placed a thick armchair by the window and layered a woven throw across it, forest green, like the old curtains in Mom's room. I added a low bookshelf, 2 potted ferns, and a brass reading lamp from a local thrift store. It wasn't a shrine. It was a beginning. Somewhere quiet to think, to heal, to write. And that's when I got the idea. What if this house wasn't just a home again, but a space for others? The thought hit like a match in dry wood. The women I'd met at grief support meetings, the ones at work who stayed late just to avoid going home to silence, the friends who'd lost mothers and didn't know what to do with the quiet afterward. What if there was a place they could come to just be? No therapy, no group sessions, no instructions, just a soft space. That evening, I sat on the porch with my sketchbook and mapped out a new version of the house, not to change the bones, but to shift the energy. Reading nooks in corners. Journals left out on tables. A memory wall in the front hallway where guests could pin photos or write names on index cards and tack them to cork board, little offerings to the people they'd loved and lost. It felt wild, huge, maybe even a little naive. But I couldn't stop drawing. The next morning, I called Danny. "I have an idea," I said, "and I need you to tell me if it's crazy." She met me at the house by noon. I walked her through it, room by room, idea by idea. She didn't laugh, she didn't blink. She smiled. "Morgan," she said, "it's not crazy, it's sacred." I looked at her. "I think you should do it." So I did. Over the next month, I applied for a microgrant from a local women's wellness initiative. I filed a zoning request for dual-use occupancy, residential, and nonprofit. I registered the name, the Birch House, a nod to the tree that once towered in the backyard where Harper and I used to dig for worms after the rain. And quietly, without fanfare, I began transforming the house. I wasn't alone. Danny helped on weekends. My coworker Marla donated old cushions and curtains. A neighbor I barely knew dropped off ceramic mugs and a stack of wool blankets with a note that read, "In case someone needs warmth more than words." Word spread slowly. Then one afternoon, I received a message through the contact form on the Birch House website, barely live, only a single page with the address and a photo of the porch. It was from a woman named Claire. She'd lost her sister in a car accident 6 months earlier, couldn't sleep, couldn't cry, just needed somewhere quiet to sit that wasn't her living room. I told her she could come by any time. She showed up the next day, eyes ringed with fatigue. She didn't say much, just walked into the reflection loft upstairs, curled up in the armchair with one of the journals, and stayed for 3 hours. When she left, she didn't say goodbye. But she came back the next week. In the week after that, soon she brought a friend. Then another woman came, then two more. They never came in groups, it was always quiet, always gentle. But the house began to fill with presents. With life. One morning, as I was restocking the bookshelf with new journals, I noticed a small folded note tucked between two novels. It was handwritten, careful script. I haven't said her name out loud in 4 months, but today I wrote it 5 times, thank you for the space. Jay. I pressed the note to my heart and sat on the stairs, overwhelmed. This house, once a battleground between me and Harper, once a symbol of all the things we'd broken, was becoming something whole. And speaking of Harper, I hadn't heard from her since the transfer. Until I did. It started with a letter. No return address, no fanfare. Just a simple envelope left in the Birch House mailbox. Inside was a card. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope there's a version of the future where we don't have to keep pretending we don't miss each other. I didn't know how to respond. So I didn't. Not right away. Instead, I went up to the attic that evening, lit a candle on the windowsill, and wrote her back. I don't know what the future looks like yet, but I know I want it to be softer than the past. One letter at a time is a good place to start. I left it in the mailbox the next day. Weeks passed. We didn't text, we didn't call. But every so often, another letter would appear. Small stories, fragments, apologies with no expectations. It wasn't rebuilding. It was rewriting. And that felt even more powerful. By late spring, the Birch House was quietly thriving. I built a small greenhouse with Danny's help. People began leaving small plant markers in the soil, not just names of herbs, but names of people. Dad, 1953-2017. Juliet, my best friend. The version of me I abandoned. We didn't explain them. We just let them be. And I realized slowly that grief wasn't something you moved past. It was something you moved with. Through. Into. Like walking deeper into a forest, not away from it. In the house. It was the clearing at the center. Not perfect, but real. Rooted. Whole. It was mid-May when Harper showed up in person. Not with a letter. Not with a warning. Just showed up. I was pruning lavender in the front garden, dirt under my nails, an old ball cap shielding my face from the sun. I heard the crunch of gravel behind me, the same sound I'd heard every morning as a kid when Mom left for work, and I turned around, expecting to see a neighbor or maybe Danny with fresh mulch. But it was her. Harper stood at the end of the walkway, arms wrapped around herself, hair pulled into a tight braid. She wasn't dressed up. No curated smile. Just jeans, a navy sweatshirt, and eyes I didn't recognize, tired but open. I wiped my hands on a towel and stood slowly. Neither of us spoke for a full 30 seconds. Then she nodded toward the house. It looks like home again. It is, I said, tone neutral, for a lot of people now. She looked down at her feet, then back up. I didn't come to take anything. Good. I brought something, though. She held up a worn box, the kind you find in the back of a closet, taped twice, a small sticker in the corner, Morgan's, 1996. She stepped forward and set it gently on the porch. I found it when I was clearing out my storage unit, she said. It's your old art supplies, the pastels, the sketchbooks, that picture you drew of Mom cooking in the kitchen. My throat tightened. I thought they were gone, I said. So did I. She stepped back. I know I don't get to ask for anything, she said, but I wondered if maybe one day I could sit in the attic just once to say goodbye to her there. The attic. Her old kingdom. The one I had spent years forbidden from. I didn't answer right away. She didn't push. She just nodded and said, whenever or never, I'll be okay either way. Then she turned and left. I stood on the porch long after her car disappeared down the street. That night, I sat in the attic, lit only by the glow from the skylight and the flickering flame of a lavender candle. I opened the box. Inside was a stack of sketchbooks I'd long forgotten, pages yellowed, edges curled. Drawings of the garden, of my mother reading, of Harper sleeping on the couch with her mouth wide open and a bowl of popcorn on her lap. I laughed. Then I cried. And then I wrote her back, this time in ink, not email. You can come to the attic tomorrow, I'll leave the door open. She arrived just after noon. Didn't knock, didn't ring. She stepped in quietly, barefoot, carrying nothing. I was already upstairs, sitting in the corner chair with a journal on my lap. She nodded when she saw me. I didn't know you'd be here, she said softly. I wasn't sure if I should be. She walked over to the window and stood beside it, hands gently touching the sill. She took a long breath. Mom used to let me sit up here when I couldn't sleep. She'd sneak me hot chocolate and tell me to write everything I was afraid to say. I smiled faintly. She told me the attic was her escape. She said that to both of us, Harper said, and we both laughed. She turned around, eyes glassy but calm. I'm sorry, she said. Not just for the money, for erasing you, for treating grief like a competition, for stealing the only place you ever felt safe. I looked at her, this woman who once weaponized everything I loved, and saw not a villain, but someone finally carrying her own consequences. I didn't rush to respond. Instead, I said, the house doesn't belong to just me anymore. It belongs to the people who walk in needing to remember something or someone. She nodded. I'm one of those people, she whispered. I stood and crossed the attic, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. Then sit right, be one of them. She sank into the window seat and curled up like she used to, knees tucked beneath her. I left her there, not as a punishment, not as a test, but because I trusted her to be with the house on her own. Downstairs, I poured tea and sat at the kitchen table with the old quilt folded beside me. That evening she joined me. We didn't say much, but she helped slice fruit, set out mugs, fold letters left by other women who had stopped by that week. She moved with quiet reverence, not the dramatic flurry I'd grown up with, but a calm kind of service. Like maybe she wanted to be useful. Later that week, she showed up again. Then again. She didn't overstay. Didn't ask to be included. She just offered watering plants, refilling pens in the loft, organizing books on the shelves by theme, grief, growth, letting go. One morning, Danny pulled me aside. She's trying, she said. I know, I replied. Are you ready to let her back in? I looked around. The house had changed so much, and so had we. I don't know, I said honestly, but I think the house is. That weekend, we hosted our first letter night. A quiet invitation for women to bring a letter they'd written to someone they lost, to read aloud, burn, or leave on the memory wall. The house filled with soft sobs, candlelight, and the scratch of pens against paper. At the end, Harper stood by the fireplace, clutching an envelope. She didn't read it aloud, but she placed it in the copper bowl and lit the flame herself. The fire caught, flared, and flickered out. And when she turned, I saw it, the release. The letting go. Of guilt. Of anger. Of whatever story she'd told herself about who she was and who I had to be. We didn't speak that night. We didn't need to. She returned the next day with fresh flowers. And we planted them together in the garden. Tulips, daisies, a single rose bush in the corner. For her, we said at the same time, laughing through sudden tears. And as we knelt side by side in the dirt, I felt it, not forgiveness, not yet, but hope. And for the first time since she stole from me, that felt like enough. The rose bush bloomed by early June. Pale pink, edged in white, the kind Mom used to keep clipped in a mason jar on the kitchen windowsill. Harper watered it every morning, even if she didn't come inside. Sometimes I'd hear her outside before I was fully awake, humming softly, her footsteps light on the porch. She didn't overstep. That was the most surprising part. She didn't try to reclaim anything or stake a claim in what the Birch house had become. She moved like a visitor, not a founder, quiet hands, listening ears. And she never touched the attic again. One morning, as I refilled the tea station in the reflection loft, I found a new note pinned to the corkboard. I'm still afraid to tell my story, but I think I've found a place where I might try. MJ. It reminded me of the women who arrived weekly now, sometimes silently, sometimes with shaking voices and palms full of grief. They left behind folded napkins with names scribbled on them, Polaroids of lost mothers, pebbles from their childhood homes. They didn't want solutions. They wanted somewhere that didn't flinch when they cried. That's what the house had become. And somewhere in the background of all of it, Harper became present. Not perfect, but present. It wasn't the reunion we'd once imagined as kids. It wasn't movie montage forgiveness. But it was real. She started leading Wednesday mornings, slow circles, not quite a support group, not quite yoga. Just women sitting together with mugs of warm chai, writing prompts folded in a basket at the center of the floor. One of the prompts I wrote for her group was simple. What part of yourself did you abandon to survive? She said nothing the day she pulled that one, just folded it into her palm and stared out the window for a long time. Later, I found her journal open on the kitchen table. I didn't mean to read it, but the page caught my eye. She had written, I abandoned the version of me who knew how to stay, the one who wasn't scared of silence, the one who loved without performing. I closed the journal gently. Maybe that was the bridge between us now. We'd both abandoned parts of ourselves to survive this house, this family, this grief. And now we were both learning how to come back to those parts, one step at a time. By mid-June, I made another decision. It started small. I told Danny first. I think I want to move out. Her eyes widened. Out of the house. Not away from it, I clarified. Just give it more space to breathe. Let it fully become what it's becoming, a place for others, not just me. She nodded slowly. Where would you go? I smiled. Nowhere far. There's a little cottage behind the park trail. It's quiet, walking distance. Feels like a secret I could still come by every day. You're not abandoning it. No, I said, I'm setting it free. The birch house had been my anchor, my grief, my revenge, my purpose, but now it was blossoming into something bigger than me, and I didn't want to suffocate it with ownership. I wanted to let it lead. When I told Harper, her mouth opened slightly in surprise. I thought you'd live here forever. I did too. She hesitated. Will it still be yours? I thought for a moment. It'll always be part of me, but it belongs to everyone now. A week later, I signed a lease on the cottage. 900 square feet, 2 bedrooms, a fireplace that needed work, and wild strawberries growing along the back fence. It felt possible. I began packing up my few belongings, most of which were folded into the house now anyway. A favorite mug, my mother's scarf, a sketchbook I kept tucked in the drawer beside my bed. On my final night sleeping at the birch house, I climbed into the attic one last time and lit the candle by the window. I sat with my legs curled beneath me, watching the moonlight spill across the floor. I thought of Mom. Of the way she used to say, some houses don't need fixing, they need witnessing. And that's what this place had become, not a renovation but a witnessing. Of pain, of healing, of truth. I wrote a letter that night, not to Harper, not to Mom, not even to myself. To the house. Thank you for holding me when I had nothing left. For remembering what I forgot. For showing me that reclamation is not revenge. It's resurrection. I folded the letter and slipped it into the floorboard crack behind the attic beam. A quiet offering. A final goodbye. The next morning, Harper showed up to help me carry boxes. She didn't say much, just packed her trunk with quiet grace. Before I left, I handed her a copy of the new door key. For emergencies, I said. She blinked fast, nodded, thank you. I mean it, for emergencies only. This place needs air now. We stood on the porch together for a moment, watching the wind ripple through the birch leaves. She said, you made this house a home again. I shook my head gently. We did. Then I turned, walked down the steps, and headed toward something new. The cottage was small and sunlit, unfinished but promising. The first thing I did was hang one of Mom's old tea towels in the kitchen window. Then I curled up on the floor and cried. Not out of loss, but out of release. It was over. Not the memory, not the connection, but the war, the ache, the proving. I didn't need to be the guardian of a house anymore to be the keeper of its story. And that story, it was still being written. The cottage was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that hums with absence, but the kind that feels like exhaling. No creaking stairwells, No ghosts in the walls, just my breath, the occasional chirp of birds, and the sound of the wind grazing the ivy outside my window. The birch house was 3 blocks away. I passed it on my morning walks, sometimes catching glimpses of women stepping onto the porch with notebooks tucked under their arms, others leaving with red eyes but softer faces. I didn't always go in. Sometimes I just waved if I saw Harper through the kitchen window, or I'd leave a fresh loaf of bread on the steps with a note. Still rising, just like all of us. Living apart from the house changed everything. I didn't realize how much of my identity had become entwined with those walls until I stepped away from them. In my new space, I found parts of myself I hadn't heard from in years. The girl who used to sketch late into the night, who played vinyls while dancing barefoot in mismatched socks, who sang to the plants on the windowsill just to see if they'd bloom faster. And for the first time, the grief felt quiet and manageable. Not gone, but no longer my jailer. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mailbox of the cottage. No stamp, no envelope. Just folded paper with a single word on the front, if. Inside in Harper's writing. If I had said sorry sooner. If I had told you I was scared. If I had asked to grieve beside you, not against you. If I hadn't touched what wasn't mine. If I could take it all back, would you still have opened the door? It was signed with just her initial. I didn't write back. But 2 days later, I showed up on the porch of the birch house just as her morning circle was ending. She stepped out to water the roses. We locked eyes. I got your letter, I said. She straightened slowly. I wasn't sure if I should leave it. You shouldn't have, I said. Her face fell. But I'm glad you did. She blinked fast, nodded. I'm still learning how to be honest without being afraid. I stepped up beside her, took the hose, and finished watering the rose bush. We stood in silence. Then she said, the attic's never been the same since you left. I smiled. It's not supposed to be, it was always meant to evolve. Like us. Like everything that's still alive. That night, Harper came to the cottage for dinner. She brought a bottle of wine and a stack of old family photos she'd found in one of her storage bins. We sat cross-legged on the floor, the smell of baked rosemary chicken in the air, flipping through snapshots of Christmas mornings, backyard slip-and slides, and beach trips where we both had sunburns and Kool-Aid-stained lips. There was one photo that stopped us cold. Mom on the porch swing, a mug in her hand, eyes closed, chin tilted toward the sky. She looked peaceful, unbothered, like she trusted the future even though she wouldn't be in it. She'd be proud of you, Harper said, voice barely audible. I looked at her. She'd be proud of us, I replied. Later that week, I started planning something new. It came to me in the middle of the night, a dream maybe, or a memory. A retreat. A weekend gathering of women from the Birch House community, not just to write or reflect but to plant something, to claim space, to witness each other's stories in real time. I pitched the idea to Danny and Harper over brunch. They both said yes before I even finished explaining. We called it the First Bloom. The retreat would happen in early fall when the weather softened and the garden glowed gold in the late afternoon. We'd host 12 women. We'd cook together, journal, share meals at the old backyard table, and end the weekend with a planting ceremony, each woman bringing a seed or bulb to plant as a symbol of whatever they were choosing to grow next. It felt right. Like the next chapter of the house was ready to be written. The weekend came fast. On the first evening, I stood at the front steps of the Birch House, a bundle of sage in one hand, a basket of journals in the other, welcoming each guest with a hug and a whispered, "You're here now, you made it." We had women from all walks of life. A young widow. A woman estranged from her daughter. A woman whose sister had died by suicide. A woman who had buried a version of herself 10 years ago and was just now crawling out of the grave. We gathered in the living room that night with the lights low, each of us placing a small item on the altar at the center. A photo, a ring, a feather, a slip of paper. Harper placed a dog-eared copy of Little Women, our mother's favorite. I brought it for her, she said quietly, but also for the girl I used to be. There were tears, there was laughter, there was space. On the final day, just before the planting ceremony, one of the women, Julia, pulled me aside. I don't have anything to plant, she said, eyes rimmed red. I forgot, and I feel so empty. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single acorn I'd found on the birch house path that morning. Then plant this, I said. She took it, trembling. Will it grow? She whispered. If you let it. That afternoon, 12 women knelt in the dirt and pressed hope into the earth. We marked each spot with a small wooden tag, names, words, prayers. Mine read, "Let go, let grow." Harper said, "Stay." When it was done, we stood in a wide circle, holding hands. And I looked at the house. At the place where I was once betrayed. Where I fought back. Where I rebuilt. And where somehow I had forgiven. Not because she earned it. Not because I forgot. But because I needed to be free. The birch house stood behind us, glowing in the autumn light. Alive. Witnessing. Whole. 2 weeks after the retreat, I visited the birch house alone at dusk. The garden was soft with late summer heat. The new bulbs from the first bloom retreat had begun to poke through the soil, tentative green shoots making their quiet debut. The air smelled of rosemary and damp earth, and the light from the porch windows spilled warmly onto the path. I stepped inside and let the door click gently behind me. No one was scheduled to be here tonight. The house was resting, holding, listening. I wandered through the rooms barefoot, letting the creaks and sighs of the floors guide me like a hymn. The couches still held the shape of visitors past. A shawl was folded neatly over the back of a reading chair. Someone had left behind a cup of tea with a note that read, "Didn't want to leave, but I'm taking the warmth with me." In the hallway, the memory wall was fuller than ever. Photos of mothers and sisters, hand-sketched portraits, post-it notes with single words, "Trust, try again, I'm still here." I stood there for a long time, just breathing. Then I walked upstairs and opened the attic door. The smell hit me first, lavender, dust, and something like old stories. I stepped in quietly, the wooden floor beneath me familiar, forgiving. The candle by the skylight was new, I hadn't placed it there. I walked to the window and found a journal waiting on the sill. Not one of mine. It had Harper's name etched softly on the front in gold ink. I hesitated, then opened it. On the first page was a letter to me. Morgan, I have rewritten this 100 times, but here it is. I stole more than money, I stole memory. I stole the one thing we should have had the courage to grieve together. I was scared that if you had the house, you'd have the story. And if you had the story, then I'd be forgotten. But this place isn't about either of us anymore. It's bigger, it's braver. You gave it back its heartbeat. And in doing that, you gave me mine. I don't need to be forgiven. I just needed you to know I remember now. Every room. Every laughter. Every silence between us. Thank you. I closed the journal slowly. My hands trembled, but my heart didn't. For the first time, it felt still. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was finally true. That weekend, Harper asked if she could host a writing workshop in the attic. Just 5 women, a Saturday morning, open-ended journaling, and a tea for thought circle. I said yes. And I let her lead it. I didn't hover, I didn't review her outline, I didn't try to shape it into my vision. Because this wasn't just my vision anymore. The birch house was breathing through all of us now. Later that month, I found an old photo album in my cottage closet while cleaning out my storage bin. One mom must have packed away before her final hospital stay. I opened it on a rainy night and let the hours pass page by page. There we were, me and Harper, side by side in footed pajamas under the Christmas tree, frosting cookies in the kitchen, building snowmen with lopsided smiles. And there was one photo I'd never seen before. It must have been taken by Mom. We were both seated on the porch swing. I had a notebook in my lap. Harper had her arm flung across the backrest like she owned the world. We weren't smiling at the camera. We were just looking at each other. Like we were mid-story. Mid-battle. Mid-bond. I sat with that image for a long time. Then I slipped it into a frame and brought it to the birch house the next morning. Harper was already there baking. "Hey," she said, wiping flour from her fingers. "What's that?" I showed her. She didn't speak for a while. Then softly she captured us, exactly as we were. And maybe, I said, exactly as we're becoming again. We hung the photo on the memory wall under the heading, Roots. It felt right. That night we hosted a community supper. Not just women, partners, kids, neighbors, old friends. A potluck-style meal under twinkle lights strung across the backyard. Someone brought a fiddle, someone else brought firewood. There was laughter. Dancing. The kind of joy that doesn't erase pain, it just makes room beside it. Near the end of the night, Danny clinked her glass with a fork and stood to speak. I just want to say, she said, that this house started with grief and became a lighthouse. People nodded, someone said amen. She continued, and the woman who lit that flame, even when she was still in ashes, is the reason any of us are here. She looked at me. I stood slowly, shaking my head, eyes wet. I didn't build this alone, I said. I just listened. The house told me what it needed. And eventually I learned to hear myself again too. After everyone left, Harper and I stood by the last smoldering fire pit. Do you ever miss living here? She asked. I looked around at the windows glowing, at the new chalk drawings kids had left on the sidewalk, at the garden heavy with things that never used to grow. Sometimes, I said, but mostly I'm just grateful I got to return, and even more grateful I knew when to leave. She nodded slowly. Then said, I think I want to live closer. I looked at her. You mean in the neighborhood? She smiled. Next door. My breath caught. That cottage just off Willow Street went up for rent. It's small, quiet. I applied yesterday. You're serious? She nodded. I want to be part of this, not in the center, just nearby, available, still learning. Something in me loosened, softened. Then I guess, I whispered, we really did find our way back. Not to how things were, but to how they were meant to become. The house behind us didn't speak. It didn't have to. Its walls were already echoing with the sounds of women healing. And among them now were us. Fall settled over the neighborhood like a prayer. The trees rusted to gold and fire orange. The garden at the Birch house swelled with herbs, the last of the summer squash curling under frostbitten vines. The porch creaked softly with each wind gust, and the attic glowed from within, candlelight flickering like a heartbeat. The house was ready for winter. And so was I. Life had taken on a quieter rhythm now. I spent mornings in my cottage by the window with a steaming mug of tea, reading journal entries left by women who had come through the Birch house and written their hearts into our walls. Some came back every week, others visited only once. But all left something behind, a memory, a whisper, a truth too heavy to carry alone. The Birch house didn't erase anyone's pain. It just held it differently. And that, I'd learned, was enough. Harper settled into the cottage next door just before the first frost. Her place was sparse, hand-me-down furniture, thrifted art, her dog-eared copy of Little Women perched on the windowsill. She baked often, left jars of jam and banana bread on my doorstep. We still had space between us, but it wasn't the hollow kind anymore. It was chosen, mutual. We weren't the sisters we used to be. But we were something new now. Something honest. One Friday evening, I hosted a fireside story circle in the Birch house backyard. We passed around mugs of mulled cider and took turns reading old letters, things we'd written and never sent, things we never thought we'd have the courage to say. When it was Harper's turn, she pulled a wrinkled page from her pocket, unfolded it with care, and read aloud. This is the story of the girl I used to be. The girl who hoarded grief like a weapon, who mistook control for love. Who believed that to keep something, you had to own it. But the girl I am now knows better. She knows that memory isn't property. That forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means releasing the version of yourself that clung to pain like a shield. And most of all, she knows that home isn't built from inheritance. It's built from grace. From choosing to stay when leaving is easier. From planting seeds you'll never see bloom. Just because you believe someone else will. When she finished, the fire popped softly and no one spoke. Then a woman on the far bench whispered, "That's the bravest thing I've ever heard." And I believed her. Later, as we extinguished the candles and folded the chairs, Harper pulled me into a quiet hug. Thank you, she whispered into my shoulder. For what? For letting me become someone new without asking me to forget who I used to be. I swallowed hard. You did that on your own, I said. I just stayed close enough to notice. That night back at my cottage, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The photo of us on the swing, the one Mom took, hung just above my dresser now. We were kids again in it, eyes locked like we knew a secret the world didn't understand. And maybe we had. Maybe all siblings carry a story too big to name. One that holds both the deepest wounds and the fiercest love. The next morning, I got up early and walked the path to the birch house with a box under my arm. Inside was something I hadn't touched in over a year, the legal folder from the estate. The one that had listed my inheritance, the deed transfer, the cold hard numbers. I opened the front door, moved to the fireplace, and fed each page to the flames. The crackle echoed like punctuation marks, sharp, final, warm. Then I walked upstairs to the attic. No one was there. The window glowed pale with morning light. The candle on the sill had melted into itself, a small wax lake. I pulled a clean sheet of paper from the basket and wrote slowly, hand steady. To the girl who thought revenge would heal her. You were wrong. But you had to be, because you hadn't learned yet that healing doesn't roar. It whispers. It rests. It releases. And when you finally learn to let go of the version of the story where someone has to lose, you begin to write a version where everyone gets to become. I pinned the note on the attic beam and walked down without looking back. Outside, the garden shimmered with dew. Harper was already there, trimming the rosemary. We smiled at each other, no need for words. She pointed to a patch near the edge of the garden where the soil had cracked open from a new sprout. I think that's Julia's seed, she said, from the retreat. We both knelt down beside it, brushed the dirt lightly with our fingers. A green shoot. Thin but stubborn. Thriving in silence. Growing toward the light. And somewhere, I imagined our mother watching us, not as the women she tried to raise, but the women we had chosen to become. Not perfect, but present. Planted. And finally free.